And good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome back to the Morning Spice. Of course, that was Full Stop, brought to you by R2G2 featuring Fire Rain. A cute little tidbit about that. This song was actually showcased on New Amsterdam most recently, which is a great thing for Bermuda entertainment. So I just want to say congratulations to them. But as I told folks earlier, we have someone in the studio this morning that wants to talk to all of us, and I have to say that I am, one, impressed, and two, excited to be in studio here with you this morning. Good morning, Premier E. David Burt. Hello.
Good morning to you, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm fine. It's just the juxtapositions of me like being like, ah, you be like, good morning. Hi. Are you okay? So how are you feeling? Give us a overview right now. You're sitting in the chair. Like, I sort of want to just jump into things because I know there's a lot of questions that I have, but I also, more than anything else, want to just make this a conversation where we can talk as people. And I also understand that in your responsibility to the country, you are still the premier of the country, and I respect that immensely. And for me, what I wanted to ask first is, right now we're hearing about, the delegates conference. We're hearing that pretty soon you're about to go in and there's going to be a contest for leadership. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling good. I mean, I think that as the leader of a Democratic Party in a country that has a strong and vibrant democracy, internal competition is always healthy. And from that perspective, it's a discussion of ideas. It's a discussion of how we make sure to execute on what the Progressive Liberal Party laid out to the country in two successive general elections, and to make sure that we continue to deliver in very tough times for this country. In very tough times for persons who are feeling immense stress and pressure. I see it in my family, I see it in my friends, and when we're experiencing a period, we just come through a pandemic, a significant amount of economic dislocation, and then what happens afterwards when you have this war, which is leading to this massive spike in prices. It's it's very difficult. And so from this job, I'm blessed every day that I get to wake up. I'm blessed every day that I get to wake up in family, which is loving. I get to deal with the wonderful things that all parents get to deal with, as we're talking about earlier, with children and making sure they get to school and dealing with those things. But I'm blessed, and that's the way I look at it. And as a country, we certainly have challenges, but we're also incredibly blessed on this island.
I always have to give a shout out to your team, because you are always trained, and you're trained well in terms of media, and I expect that. If you weren't, I would be dissatisfied, especially as being the leader of our country. But I'm really hoping that in this conversation today with you and I, that you have the ability to just show the human side, because a big part of what you just said, and even talking about the democratic processes, there was an article that came out from TNN that was talking about the ways in which folks are going around, well, you and Mr. Dickinson are going around and talking to delegates. And I just want to point out something right now, because I thought it was unfair, and it was inappropriate to name your wife. I've met her personally on so many occasions, even when I first arrived to the island and I was working at Blue Kids. She was always kind and always sweet to me. So when I was reading that article, I was not impressed that she was named in any way. I feel like regardless of the choice that people take to be in the public space, their families should be off limits. So I just want to preface that by saying, when I read that, and especially to your wife, that was not okay. But one of the things that I did want to ask you about, especially talking about democracy, was the idea that you're meeting with certain members in the branches. Is that true?
I'm meeting with all the branches, and people will make sure to do our best to invite everyone. But when we had our meetings as well, the full list of delegates didn't come out until I think I got the list on Tuesday morning. I think my challengers got the list on Monday afternoon. And so, you have to reach out with your best efforts. And sometimes people can't make it, but we are continuing to meet with all branches. We're going to continue to meet up and down the country. This is election season, so there's meetings every night.
Yeah.
The only night we don't have meetings is, I think, Wednesday when we have our caucus meetings, and Friday when we're in Parliament.
So were they lavish extravaganzas, as it was said in TNN? Because the way they made it seem is like you had shrimp, you had, overflowing of, I'm not going to say Hennessy, but like it was things popping off, champagne was brewing, you know what I mean? People were coming in fursuits. Like, are they actually, I'm exaggerating, of course, but was there a certain limit to how extravagant it was? Did you actually put out some money to make sure that people felt Like they were a part of this. Is there truth to that?
There's nothing lavish that goes on. I mean, most of our events take place in backyards throughout the country. We call them backyard caucuses. And
so what about the one that they stated that happened at Anchor Restaurant?
The Anchor Restaurant, they hosted us, and we had people had dinner. So I mean, we have what we normally eat: chicken,
Chicken
chicken and fish.
Unreally, you had chicken and fish. So Anchor was the folks who offered this space to you. This wasn't something that you ran out and said you want to book this space. They offered that space to
Well,
you.
there's lots of people who will various branches. So, for instance, we're going to Somerset branches. They're going to have food and host things and have refreshments. It's different things, different areas that do different things. So, from that perspective, I'm happy that people welcome us in to their branches. There's certainly people that respect the work of which the deputy leader and myself have put in over the last 6 years that we've been in leadership, and we just continue to go around. But I do want to say one thing that to get to the point of what you said, this is hard on my family. For me, I'm as you say, trained, but I've been in frontline politics since 2006 when I was chairman of the Progressive Labor Party, the youngest ever chair. And so from that perspective, I'm used to the constant media stuff, but it's not something, I never realized how it, affects my friends, how it affects my family, and how, it affects people. And the one thing that I always want to make sure we focus on are the issues that matter.
Okay, and so you did not contact Anchor. That I just wanted to get. So you did contact Anchor to have the meeting there?
And the meeting was arranged, so we were told where the meeting was going to be.
Okay, cool. So let's get into the whole conversation around family. And one of the biggest things, and in terms of clear transparency, I have a long lineage of my family being a part of the Progressive Labor Party. I mean, just to give full transparency to my listeners, I hosted one of the events where I literally broke one of my favorite green shoes, so I couldn't wear them in here today for you because I broke them up because I was carrying on the stage. I just wanted to be clear. And one of the biggest things that happens in the PLP is this idea of family. The connectivity within the party is that we are a family unit and we move that way. In terms of the outside looking in, it doesn't look like that's actually happening right now. One of the things that I said before, and I also want to offer transparency that I definitely called your name on one of my shows, and then you called and said, well, let's have a conversation about what it is that you're talking about. And when I was talking about having a humanistic view or being vulnerable with me today, it's because one of the biggest things that I stated was the juxtaposition between what it is that you state and then what happens in the long term, or what happens after certain legislation or policy comes forward. And I am wondering, from the outside looking in, and we're looking at this turmoil within the party, we're looking at the overturning of ministers who are saying that they are no longer willing to work in government or work within cabinet or whatever the case may be. And one of the key things that you led with the 2020 election was strong leadership for us. Then you see a leader with a high turnover of staff, and I'm just talking about this in management or outs cases, how does that show that there is clearly a family unit happening, that there is solidarity within the party? Because right now, looking in, it doesn't look like that at all.
Well, let me answer this question in 2 ways. The first one I'm going to answer is that you cannot judge what is taking place inside the party from the external media speculation. Whether it's the Bull Gazette, who's never going to write anything good about the Progressive Labor Party, whether it's other persons who will just publish rumor and innuendo for other reasons. And I mean, so from that perspective it is. When you look inside the party, we are a strong organization that continues to grow its membership, that continues to make sure that we get more persons involved in the work. And if you look at the work of which we're doing from the east end to the island, to the west end of the island, our branches are out on a weekly basis. We have monthly clinics. We're doing all those things, remaining connected, making sure that we are servicing and helping persons who need help. So from that perspective, I think that we remain strong. Yes, it's a period every 4 years in the Progressive Labor Party. We have elections. There's always going to be a little bit of internal jockeying. That's normal in political parties. But I don't think that it will be a fair picture to to say that there is, upheaval in those things.
Well, I feel like what you just represented was actually making sure that folks who are leaders or leaders of their branch and have a responsibility to their constituents actually create these clinics and are constantly in talks with the constituents of their constituencies. But the question that I'm asking you is there a clear break in terms of how folks respond to your leadership?
So let me go back to the other part of the question, which you asked about, cabinet ministers and other types of things like that. With the Progressive Labor Party, we are elected, and I do not get to set the policy direction for the country. And I think that's something that's important to know.
Okay.
The policy direction for the party comes from the members and the delegates. The platform that we have, there are certain things inside of that platform that I don't necessarily agree with. But that does not mean that I do not have to carry them out, because we work for the members of the party when we're inside of government. Insofar as turnover, insofar as cabinet, if you go back and do an analysis of the amount of turnover which you have seen in my government over the time that I'm leading, I think you will see the least amount of cabinet changes and the least amount of switches that you've seen over other leaders.
Really?
Absolutely, because early on in my tenure, when I remember I did a little shuffle, I want to say in 2018, I recognized how much cabinet shuffles actually push back progress. New ministers come in, have to learn their briefs. It takes a while for them to get up to speed on certain aspects, and you're moving. And that is something, because I know that the people who vote for us want to actually see progress. I know the members who I work for want to see the ideas that they put forward to us and say, this is what we want you to make sure that you deliver in government, that we actually get it delivered.
Okay, so in terms of policies, because there was something that dinged off in my mind about you saying there are certain policies that are put forward that I don't agree with. One of the policies that I would have asked you if you agree with is Minister Jason Hayward's position paper addressing the challenge of an aging population in Bermuda, which outlines an aggressive strategy to get an estimated 8,418 extra jobs of able-bodied persons. Do you stand behind this piece of legislation or policy that's being put forward by your Minister of Labor?
Absolutely. I think what's important is that we want to make sure that we grow the Bermuda economy. We have a demographic challenge in Bermuda. And the demographic challenge is that people are having less children. People are getting older. Oh, don't worry, it's expensive, and I hope we can touch on that. Because it's something that is important when we're talking about how do we address the challenges that are faced by my constituents, your friends, and others. But I think if you look at that, and when we're talking about 8,000 more jobs, we're talking about getting the Bermuda back to where we were before the global financial crisis. And so I don't think that is too far of a stretch, because we've been there before, and we want to make sure that we have more jobs. And the best way that we have more jobs is to secure additional tourism investment, which is a huge employer in the country.
Okay, but I want to sort of take it back, because you brought up earlier about younger you, about younger David coming up, or maybe it was the E part of the name before it became David. I'm not going to say what it is, because there's a reason why it's an E. But in my research and looking back, there was an article in 2016 where you were talking about the pathways field. And you were talking about the ways in which grassroots folks are coming forward and standing up towards the government for things that they are asking for. That bill looking very similar to the one that you're proposing right now. And a big part of folks actually falling in line with you was the ways in which you actually connected to the activists on the ground who were opposing a bill similar to the one that Jason Hayward put forward. And you said yourself that you agree and feel that it is irresponsible. That was your words from the article. That was your directing. It was irresponsible for something like this to happen. And now you're saying that in terms of building the economy, is essential to have something like this. And for me, as someone who is listening to you and who is engrossed in what's happening on my island, that's where the hypocrisy or the juxtaposition comes in.
Can I help to explain that?
Because
I don't think it's accurate to say that it's a bill.
Young David, okay, what would you call it?
So here's pathways to status is something completely different than a policy paper which is stating that the government must make sure that given our demographics, we have to have policies and laws that can make sure that we increase the number of working persons on the island and jobs by 8,000. That is completely different to pathways to status.
Okay, but in terms of the actual average Bermudian who is not going to actually take that in. What they are taking in is what that person, what that David looked like. That David looked like he was in touch with what was happening. He looked like he was against this idea that we need to import work when there's a whole group of youth out there who aren't able to find job security. Where in terms of the working force, we're pushing to add to the retirement age, which isn't actually something that it seemed that young David was actually standing behind. But now we're standing here, and it seems like there's a different person who's coming out with things that are more right-leaning policies.
So let me help you explain that, because I think that it's important, and I thank you for asking the question. Pathways to Status was a completely different proposal.
Okay.
Pathways to Status basically said that we are going to extend Bermudian status to everyone who has been...
But hold on. But I'm asking you about you.
Allow me to try to explain, please,
Okay.
if I can.
Okay.
Because you said that it is a difference, and I'm trying
in
to...
the person.
In
you as a leader. Because when you first started, one of the things that you said in this 2016 article was that you remember coming to the island at 23 and applying.
Why I joined the Progressive Labor Party.
Can you share that?
I'm happy to say.
Okay.
You gotta let me respond, please. When I came back to Bermuda with someone with 2 degrees, and I was unable, having sent out multiple applications,
you stated,
multiple to get responses to jobs. And I remember how difficult that felt for me. And it is important to ensure that we have opportunity in this country for young people. The crux of the question which you asked, and you keep saying about, the difference.
Yeah, change.
There is no change, and that's what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
There is no change. What we have to make sure we do in this country is provide a stable future for our young people. If we do not have an economy that can support public services, that can support an aging population, we will end up with higher taxes, and we all know that taxes in this country are pretty high right now, the burden of the cost of living. The approach of the One Bermuda Alliance back then was to say, here is how we're going to fix it. We are going to extend Bermuda status to everyone who's been here for more than 15 years, and that will end up to increase our economy. Nothing inside of the policy proposals that Minister Hayward has laid out has said that that is going to happen. No. So that's why I say there's a fundamental difference.
Okay.
But from the approach of which we have to take in government, and if you're asking about myself, we have to make sure that we are honest with the people that we serve. And in this case, as our population continues to age, we do need more people working in this economy. Minister Hayward did not say that we need to import 8,000 persons. Minister Hayward said that our working population must increase. And so it's
how do you do that?
Thank you. It is a policy perspective that was laid out. And if you read the entire paper, the paper says the government is going to look at various policy proposals in order to meet this goal. And that is a fundamental difference of approach from the OBA. If the OBA had their policy prescription, their policy prescription was, we're going to introduce pathways to status, and everyone who's been here longer than what's it called will have the eternal right to stay here, work, to live, to vote, to do all those other types of things. Whereas our approach is that we have to look at it in a totality, because we recognize, exactly as you said, exactly as I feel, that we have to ensure that Bermudians have a place to survive, exist, and thrive in their economy. So when you ask whether or not I agree with what Minister Hayward has laid out for a policy proposal, you cannot argue with facts. If our aging population continues to age and our working population does not expand, we will not be able to support.
And is our working population not expanding because our population isn't expanding, or is it not expanding because there's a mass exodus of people in my age group that are leaving the country to find opportunity elsewhere, to find a place where they can ensure job security and a basic standard of living that is not available to them right now?
And so on that, I think that it's a key point, because I know how difficult it is to make ends meet, especially for young parents.
What experience do you have with that?
Please understand, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I have friends and family. I have family members right now who are struggling and challenged that we all have to support. That's the way of which inside of society it is particularly difficult.
And do you feel now in your positionality as the leader of this country, you're still in contact and you still understand that intimately?
There's no question about that. Because I don't just sit in the cabinet office. Whether it's me, whether I'm attending events throughout the country, whether I'm enjoying sports, whether I'm going and meeting in the community and hearing the stories of people and challenge, I make myself available so persons can feel free to reach out. I remember having a conversation with a young lady a couple weeks ago who was talking about the fact that, she's a single mother making $72,000 a year and having difficulty making ends meet. The crush of which she's having to pay for childcare, the difficulty in those things. So without question, I am connected. And just so on that basis, that is the basis of where we make sure that we formulate our policies. So when I took back over the Ministry of Finance, and I said, one of the things we have to do is to make sure that we provide relief to working people and to make sure that we return as much taxpayers' money to taxpayers who need help, who need assistance. And what we are going to continue to do is that, because we have to relieve the burdens and the pressures. What I feel is, that there's a lot of stress in the community, that there's a lot of angst. And a lot of
anger and frustration and bewilderment. Folks are feeling like, actually, before we even get into that, because I feel like one of the things that you have done most recently to actually address what is happening on the island and to sort of offer at least the scope that there is, as you say, relief now and more relief to come, correct? Is the duty eliminated on various essentials, which is an extension of the first cost of living commission that you put forward in July, correct? And in here it says there's 21 categories of essential goods as follows: ground beef, chicken, and it goes on laundry detergent, bath soap, bar, sanitary towels, pads, tampons, whatever the case, but it's on the import duty. The import duty. So that means that in terms of the retailers, they are the ones that are no longer going to have to pay on these items, correct?
Importers, many persons, whether it's people who import themselves, whether it's people who, may import laundry detergent and sell it on the side of the road as vendors, and whether it's supermarkets. But one of the key points is that we've been working with the retailers to make sure that these costs are passed on to consumers.
Yes.
And when you talk about the core, right here, one of the things that is important when you're in government is you understand from past experience what you must do. This is not the first time that we have eliminated duty on percent, because in the 2018 budget we eliminated duty on a wide range of fruits and vegetables.
It was 8 from what I saw.
A wide range of fruits and vegetables, linens and other things for school uniforms and different things. We also lowered the duty on those. And one of the feedback measures that we got was that that is not being passed on to the customers.
Yes.
So in 2020, what we did was that we changed the Cost of Living Commission Act to require for retailers to make sure that they are reporting prices on goods that we deem to be essential. And one of the things in which we've been doing is working with the retailers and wholesalers, actually, a meeting later today to make sure when we debate this bill in Parliament tomorrow that we can share with the country how persons are actually going to see their reductions in their bills, because it doesn't help if the government, it doesn't help the people who we serve if the import duty is reduced, but yet that cost is not passed on to consumers. But I think what's also important to note, Alex, is that not everyone goes to the store. People also bring in their own items. Other, mom and pop shops, wholesalers that set up and all the rest,
but
they bring in their own stuff as well.
That's not a huge part of the population. Most of the population goes to farmers markets or major grocery store retailers to get their foods. And in terms of what you were saying before, in terms of the cost of living commission and working with the retailers to put forward the price or the markup of items, that's what I read, that the public will be able to track the change in the price of the 34 essential goods. This is coming from the July 2000 and June 17, 2022, when this was first put forward, following the government's move to reduce duty on the staple goods recommended by the Cost of Living Commission. What is supposed to happen once we are tracking these prices? What happens after that? What is the process of accountability to these retailers when there is a steady price increase on goods, and the only thing that we have is the ability to know how they're upmarking their prices. What is the next phase of that? How does the government hold them accountable?
So through the Cost of Living Commission, and remember this goes to policy and law, we've put in place laws that allow for better accountability. We've increased, one of the things we said in 2017 was to increase the power of the Cost of Living Commission. We did put that in place in 2017, where the Cost of Living Commission can actually go ahead and request information, can hold hearings, can hold items, and also one of the things that we launched through the pandemic is that persons can actually file complaints online about where they feel that they're being price gouged. But I think it's important that we discuss this situation in totality. And the key point is that in the Bermudian context, just as in the global context, following the pandemic, there is a very rapid rise in prices globally.
For sure.
We import everything into Bermuda. One of the things that I think is important if we look at it on a long-term basis, and that's where we go back to, because you keep referring back to, core David, Prince David. One of the things that this country must do, and if I look back to our time in opposition, is to make sure that we are more self-sufficient, to make sure that we are growing more healthy fruits and vegetables on this island. And that is the reason why, whether advancing things inside of the economic recovery plan to increase vertical farming on the island, to make sure that we're able to produce items here on the island so those costs can reduce. But if you look at it on a global basis, this is the key point, if you look on a global basis, prices are going up.
Yes.
We know that. That is what's happening when shipping costs are tripled and we have to ship everything to the island, where the costs of goods that are being done are increasing. The question is, what is government's response?
Yes.
We can't lower prices overseas.
Right.
But what we can do is do whatever we can to, number one, reduce the pressure of that cost increase here by reducing customs duty and ensuring those savings are passed on. And the second thing that we have to do is to make sure that we put more taxpayers' money into persons' pockets so they can better cope with the increasing prices.
But the thing is, it's like, who is actually going to feel this relief? Because when I ask for the accountability of what is supposed to happen when there is, it's this lengthy process of the consumer having the responsibility of having to go forward and go to court and say, this is price gouging, this is what's happening.
That's not
but when we
correct.
look,
The Cost of Living
when we
Commission
look
monitors
at
this stuff often.
when we look at, I have here the BMC Public Health Research Survey. Have you ever seen it before? Have you ever seen this in terms of those sugar tax and the I guess you would say the consequences of the sugar tax? One of the biggest things that was stated in this research was the fact that when the sugar tax was introduced and duty was increased to the highest of 75%, that across the board that was placed on other products within the grocery stores, within the retailers, that because of the pass-through method of actually eliminating or increasing the import duty, that retailers had the ability to just make sure to increase items across the board to make up for the sugar tax duty. And even though when the sugar tax was introduced, there was 8 essential things that were put forward to be zero import duty, the point is that I'm making is that it seems like the folks that are actually going to benefit from this are the owners of the store and not the retailers. I mean, not the consumers. And the reason for that is because it outlines here that when there is not a cohesive plan, meaning the sugar tax was placed in the overall tax revenue. It was used for a short time for education purposes, but in terms of the long term, it was put right into customs taxes. So now you have folks who are seeing the increase of their prices for something that was under the guise of this is for healthy living, this is to make sure to ensure the future of us. But the reality is, we as the people, we as the consumers felt that because even though the retailers or the folks that own the stores got zero import duty, they didn't pass that on to us. But we did see an increase once the import duty was raised on certain sugar products. We saw that in the increase of our food. So when I asked you, and when I said earlier about young David, who seemed to have a holistic approach and a really grassroots social justice ethos, I guess we can say, the juxtaposition, the yes and no, the no and yes of it all, seems like you're giving us something to give us hope. I'm eliminating the 0% import duty tax, I'm doing that so it could benefit you, the Bermudian. I'm doing that so it could benefit you, the consumer. But there's evidence that we are not going to feel that.
So can I say something else?
Sure.
Here's what's important. I will talk about the sugar tax in a bit, but here's what's important. What you have said is that we are going to reduce duty, and what you said is that it's important that it's passed on to the consumer.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that that is the responsibility of government. We haven't even been able to lay out to the country what we've been working with retailers and wholesalers to ensure these costs are passed on. And what I'm saying is, when you go back to David, I understand the pressures of which people are facing in this country, whether it's in child care costs, whether it's in healthcare costs, whether it's in issues dealing with housing, which I actually believe is the biggest issue that we're dealing with right now in this country, and we're going to be able to speak to that in Parliament tomorrow. But here's the thing, the government must be responsive to those concerns. And so what I am asking is that when we lay out the plans, I'm happy to speak to it. But what you're basically saying is that the duty is going to be released and it's not going to be passed on. And what I'm trying to say is that that is an experience that has happened, and a government that doesn't learn from the past is not a government that is working for the people. And so what I'm saying is that that is something that we are intently focused on, and something that we will deliver. On the matter of on the matter of the sugar tax, and I think that this is something that is important. One of the things in which we are doing is we are reviewing the sugar tax and the implications of
to take it away, to repeal it, or to change it.
Allow me to, please. The sugar tax was put in place on a wide variety of goods. Can I tell you, do you know what the source of the sugar tax was? Do you know where the idea came from?
Where did it come from?
It was actually passed in the 2015 Progressive Labor Party Delegates Conference when it came from one of our branches, and that is the reason why it was placed inside the Progressive Labor Party's election manifesto. Because, and remember, we must be responsive to the members of the party of whom we work for. Now, the implementation of the sugar tax went through a consultation period, and what we have seen in the long-term trends, it has led to a reduction of the consumption of sugary items. What is, however,
but what I've read is that it wasn't, there was a slight reduction for a period of time, but once folks got used to the prices, it really did nothing to deter them from actually buying sugary substances or sugary drinks.
There has been less importation of sugary items. There has been a transfer into other spaces. But here's what's important, and this is what I'm trying to get at insofar as the review of the sugar tax, is that there are some items, such as, I'll give the one example, kind bars, which someone would consider something that is healthy. They have added sugar in them, and therefore they were subject to the sugar tax. We are currently undergoing a review process right now, and yes, for those things, those items will be removed, and we'll make sure to work to make sure we see reduction in those items, because the main target, of course, is high sugary drinks, dilutables, and those type of items which can have long-term health effects, which over time drive up all of our taxes and all of our healthcare costs.
But the thing is like, okay, so I want to take it back to you saying that you are currently working with retailers and folks to actually make sure that the consumer feels the changes in prices. Whereas when you first put forward the Cost of Living Commission, and I'm quoting you, you stated, sadly, the Bermuda government cannot control the cost of food.
We cannot control the cost of
So
food.
how is it that you are going to ensure that the consumer is going to actually feel
So
the benefits of this?
I think I've tried to explain it, and I'm going to.
But the ways in which you're describing it and the ways that you're explaining it comes back to the first conversation that I'm having. I just said that you said that you can't control the cost of food, and you just said that you're working to do so. And so for the listeners and for the folks who are listening to you, there's this thing of you putting something forward that isn't true to the identity or the crux of what you are putting into implementation to rule our island.
So
it seems like you're saying
Alex,
one thing and then something else happens behind doors. Because even with the sugar tax, when it was put forward, it was said that the revenue was going to go towards making sure there was educational programs and teaching our kids how to eat healthy and things to make sure that our community was being healthy. But then once it was passed, it was put into an entire customs duty entirely. And the consumer and the folks and the Bermudians, we felt the cost of that increase. So now you're saying that you're working with retailers to make sure that we feel it, but you just said that the government cannot control that. Why?
Okay, so let me try again. What I had said in that statement, and it's important that you read the entire thing. It's the It's the exact same thing I said before. That we cannot control the cost.
Why? Why can't you control the cost of food?
I explained it earlier.
How? Why? I just want a very clear answer. Why can you not control the cost of food? As the government who's supposed to make sure that we are protected, that we as the people are protected, that when you put these things forward, that we can go to you and say something is happening here. There's an increase in the price of food. There's an increase in our rent. There's an increase in the way that we live. And when we hear our leader say that you can't control that, but then in the same breath say you're working with retailers to make sure that consumer feeds that. Can't you see how that feels and seems hypocritical?
So allow me to try to answer, please, Alex.
Okay.
Please. When we're talking about, in that statement, we cannot control the global cost of food.
Yes, you can't control the global cost.
Please allow me to answer, please.
Okay.
I'm asking you.
Okay.
We cannot control the global cost of food. When strawberries or other items or things that are imported, cooking oil, increases because of supply chain challenges that are happening in the United States, that is not something that the government can control. What we can control is what takes place here. How is the cost impacted by duty? How is the cost impacted by other items? And to work with those persons who are either importing or retailing to make sure that we can lower those costs. We have a cost of living commission that has been diligent in making sure that we're putting together a plan that these duty changes and relief will be passed on, and we see a reduction in the cost of essential goods at major retailers. That's what we can control. But for me to say that, food prices are going high and we're going to be able to lower them by 20% across the board, that's just not true. And so one of the things, because it goes back to this issue of you saying, I think that it's important for leaders to make sure that they are honest with the people of whom they serve.
And I agree.
And so in that case, I don't want to give unrealistic expectations that with the continued costs of importing and increases across the world, we're going to be able to somehow avoid that in Bermuda. But what is important is that the government says, here is the issue. We have what we've deemed an essential basket of goods. We are going to make sure that we can at least lower the costs in those and to work with retailers and wholesalers to make that a reality. And that is the work of which we're engaged in.
Well, the time is now 9:22, and
Really?
I know that.
That fast?
Yes, that fast, and I know that you have to leave.
Well, there's a lot of things I want to talk
Yeah,
about.
so I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that right now. What is, in terms of, for the folks who are listening in, and I'm hoping that people are coming to their own conclusions outside of their personal beliefs towards you, what would you say to those that are uneasy and feel that you talk a great game, but when it comes to actually producing, we don't see that. We're not witnessing that.
So-
And I feel like right now, especially with this, in terms of saying that, we're working with the Cost of Living Commission to make sure folks feel that. Even after I stated that there's evidence out there that so far that has not happened. And there wasn't a real response to what the accountability measures look like when the consumer does not feel it. And when folks are reading different things, especially, I'm not going to go too deep back into your past, especially when we look at some of the policies and legislations that you, as the leader of the PLP, who is not in government right now, has put forward that has seemed to go against the progressive ideas of the party, and who feel that you are not transparent, that you are not honest. What would you say to them right now?
What I would say is that the core of my being has not changed since I entered public service. I understand the reason why I'm here. And the reason why I'm here is to make an impact and change on people's lives. I remember when I was canvassed in 2017 on the doorsteps of my constituency. And there was a senior citizen who said, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to afford to send my grandson to Bermuda College next year. And I said, if you vote for us, we will make sure that that is a reality, that you do not have to worry about that. So said, so done. We sent out a mailer to every household in this family of all of the things which we've done and the promises of which we've kept. And whether that was making sure that we provide relief to working families, whether that was to make sure that we have reduced taxes for working people in this country, whether that is to make sure that we continue to provide more educational training opportunities, progress education reform. We now have trade schools back in this country where people have been calling for that, and our first signature schools opening in Cedar Ridge to make sure that people are going there. I would ask on the particular issue which you're focused on, the cost, which is the most critical one, and I'm upset that we didn't get to talk about housing, because housing is something that, is one of the things that I hear from very deeply of the plans which the government is making sure to address those particular huge challenges, and the funds of which we're making sure that we put forward so that we can make sure that there's more affordable housing in this country. But what we must be done on this particular issue when we're talking about food is we haven't even put the program into place yet. I've said that we have learned from what happened before, and we are making sure that what we fashion and structure works and can actually deliver lower prices for consumers. It's important, Alex, I have to make sure I say this. We haven't even passed the bill yet and put in place the measures for that. And so we must be judged on the results of whether or not that actually does lower prices. But at the core, what I've been doing is to make sure we work. I remain accessible. I remain, trust me, when I go out, when I go out to, watch a football game or, go to a county game or something, people will ask me questions, and I will continue to engage, continue to explain. When I go to meetings in various neighborhoods and all the rest, they ask me questions, and I will continue to make sure that we relay the issues. For me, politics is, for some, it's, a game. For others, it's something that they engage in. For me, the work in which I do is to change and impact and better people's lives. And from the perspective of the government and the perspective of governance, we have held firm in the Progressive Labor Party to our commitments, whether it is on making sure that Bermuda has a stable future, whether it's making sure that we return our economy to a place of fiscal balance while not losing our social conscience, because it's very easy to say, oh look, we've had these wonderful ratings from ratings agencies, and look, we're doing that, when people in the country are suffering. And my view is that you cannot have one without the other. You must make sure that you return what you can to the taxpayers of this country who have borne the brunt of making sure that the government is able to operate. So from that perspective, I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to speak. I hope that I can come back after this thing is passed, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yes.
And because I think that that's important, because what is important for persons to understand is the work of which we're doing must be seen in the results. It has to be seen in how persons have more money in their pockets, how we're lowering taxes, how we're making sure we're returning funds so people can cope with global inflation, and how we're actually making sure that we make progress on things that matter to people. So I do know I have to be somewhere at 9:30, so I must run. But I want to thank you very much for your time today, and I hope to be back to talk more.
Yes, I hope that you come back anytime. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It was a great conversation. And to my listeners, feel free. We're going to carry on the conversation. You are listening to The Morning Spice on HOTT 107.5.